Okay, another walk and talk, and I wanted to talk today about trauma. And when we're heavily triggered by something that happens in our life, it will always be traceable back to trauma from childhood, nearly always, for everybody. And depending on what's happened, depending on what the particular abuse is, or the traumatic event is, the first time it happens, it will then repeat, and in different form, but it's the same energy. And especially if someone has multiple traumas, which most of us do, these can be, there's like a web almost. There's a web of these different traumas, and it can become so convoluted and difficult to deal with as we go into adulthood. And I see this a lot with people, and it's really, really difficult, right? When you're in that state of really being triggered and being in pain because of what you're witnessing or what somebody is doing or appearing to do. It's a horrible place to be in, and there doesn't seem to be anywhere at the time that you can. And when I witness people going through this, my heart really goes out to them, and oftentimes there isn't really a lot more that we can do than just to hold a space for them and to listen. So that's really what I try to do when people are in the depth of the pain, that's been brought back to the surface again. The best thing I can do is hold space, listen, and just, instead of trying to fix, which isn't really what they need at that time, just to listen to what I have to say, and lean into what they're talking about, and just allow that space for them. And then after some time, you depending on how deep it is, you might have to wait a bit longer, but there'll come an opportunity where you can start to get into more rational, constructive conversation with them. So that's what I try to do. And I always say to people, if they want to move beyond this familiar pain, this trauma, then they've got to be willing to do some kind of work, with help usually, some kind of therapy, some kind of modality that's going to change it for them. It's going to change their experience, but they've got to be ready. They've gone through it enough times, repeated it enough times in their adult life, where they actually want something different. And that takes a lot of courage. And we stick with what's familiar in life, and that's not necessarily a good thing, because we'll just stay with what we know, and it might be really painful, but because it's familiar, we'll just stick with it, and that keeps us stuck in a loop, and the pain stays there. So people have got to be ready anyway, right? And when they're like, well, I want a different experience now because I've had this happen so many times and nothing's changing, then they'll start seeking out different forms of healing, different kind of, therapies, modalities, etc. And always it's going to require them to go deep into the pain, to go back to the original root of that pain, and to work through it, basically work through the layers. There'll be many, many layers to it, and it will take time. And I think this is why people don't want to do it, and why we shy away from it, is because it does take time, and it takes effort, and it takes just chipping away. It's like creating a sculpture. You just have to do a bit each day, and it does get better, but it takes effort. And it's another reason why we don't do it, and we're not taught to do that by culture or society generally. But if we do try a few things and hopefully stick with something for a while, we'll start to see the benefit, the result of it. We can really get in there with our wounded little boy or little girl, the one that's really badly hurt and suffering in there, and causing us to therefore repeat and recycle this suffering through our lives. If we can take that time, then we will help our inner child to heal it, and then life can start to change. But I think that's really what this message is about. What I'm sharing right now is it is worth it, but it takes a lot of effort. And I think for a lot of people, we have to go through something a certain number of times on repeat until we realise that staying in that loop is more painful and disruptive to our lives and more hard work than actually doing something else about it, taking some kind of action for ourselves, choosing some form of work, some form of healing. And also it's not something I feel that we go through, we have to do our whole lives. For some people it is, but I feel like we have phases in our lives, and some phases are where we have to do this work, and then others are more about just really finding ourselves and stepping into our peace. And I think that generally that comes later in life. So if you're in your 20s, 30s or 40s, this is probably kind of prime time for this kind of work. I'm still doing it, and probably will be for quite some time. There's definitely some deep-rooted trauma still there from my childhood. Some of it comes from other places too, down the family lines, etc. But when we're ready, we do make the choice, and then when situations come up in our lives that were the same as before, our response is different, and how we move through it, how we feel about it, the experience is different. Whatever comes up, whatever is presented to us in the challenge, we're able to deal with in a better way. So that's my 2p's worth on trauma. I hope that was helpful.